fun fact, did you know that Ghana's president stopped exports to Europe and Africa will start distributing its own chocolate? What a major global business move. So, what does chocolate have to do with Afro-Mexican Mayans and Aztecs? This is for my audio learners, or if you're driving and don't have time to read. The Caribbean and a warning from his chocolate factory. So I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to see the movie Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which was actually written in 1964, and then they renewed it again in 1992, and then they had the nerve to make another edition of the movie just recently. It's a very cool movie. I really love the movie, but people in the United States love chocolate, but history, not so much. For generations, we manufactured blatantly racist textbooks that taught young readers about the inferiority of African Americans. Since the 1980s, if not earlier, public schools began dropping history from their curriculum or assigned athletic coaches to the task of teaching such classes. But history is far from a dead thing. We carry it within us. African American novelist James Baldwin memorably remarked in his essay, The White Man's Guilt, "We are unconsciously controlled by it in many ways. A history is literally present in all we do. To history that we owe our frames of reference, our identities, and our aspirations." Chocolate also has a history, and despite its sweetness to many Americans and Europeans, it has a bitter legacy. Like sugar, it became a business of colonial and slave trade powers in Great Britain since the mid-17th century, sought to be in the thick of it. As British literature professor Kate Loveman wrote in a Journal of Social History in 2013, the Earl of Sandwich tried to entice the English governors into cultivating new harvests, including cocoa in the West Indies and especially Jamaica. While initially English efforts to produce Jamaican cocoa, highly priced today, proved successful, exporting quite large quantities, as one imperial historian wrote, the crop soon fell victim to hurricane and disease and competition from sugar and the more profitable slave-produced investment. The very idea of chocolate is inextricably linked to slavery. Indeed, as early as the 1850s, U.S. abolitionists had protested the cocoa trade and the cotton trade, pledging themselves to buy only free labor products. In this way, the anti-slavery newspaper, The National Era, wrote in 1856, "The sweet may be obtained without the bitter." The first cocoa shipments to Europe began in 1585. And ever since, the commodity had been identified with the colonial world of Central America and the Caribbean, but especially with West Africa. World's cocoa production shifted to West Africa about 70% today, specifically because of British interest there, especially Cadbury, the famous British chocolatier. As Jill Lane wrote in her 2007 essay, Becoming Chocolate, A Tale of Racial Translation, an important warning for Caribbean nations. African cocoa production remains fraught with social problems, including child and slave labor. Today, millions of West African children, especially in Ghana and the Ivory Coast, are caught up in cocoa trade. Many survive on little food or little pay and endure regular beatings. By one estimate, roughly half of the world's chocolate comes from the labor of exploited children. Trinidad and Tobago are experiencing a steady increase in cocoa production after a century of progressive decline from 30,000 tons per year to less than 500 tons. Cocoa orchards have been revived in Jamaica, and thousands of farmers have become involved in production. Moreover, women in St. Lucia are increasingly becoming involved in cocoa production and have formed a network of rural female producers. Is this new Caribbean production free of exploitation still found in Africa? What does cocoa production mean for today's world? Do producers understand the context of the business? One of the world's most famous successful writers of children's books grew up with chocolate and white supremacy in his veins. Born a Norwegian parent in Wales, a World War II fighter pilot, and British intelligence officer, Dal became part of the lives of millions of children around the world, especially through his two books, James and the Giant Peach and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. His fame only increased when he married the U.S. actress Patricia Neal in 1961 and 1964. His adult career began in 1936 with the Asiatic Petroleum Company, soon to become a part of Royal Dutch Shell in the former German East Africa, then known as Tanganyika. His adventure and his later career as a writer were nourished by the imperialism and racism he had grown up with. While in prep school, Dale dreamed about the gold and adventurous life that might await him in Africa, where he remarked, "There is a great advantage in traveling to hot countries where niggers dwell." I quote. Moreover, his prep school resided very near the Culberry plant. He and other students served as test subjects, passing judgment on various chocolate products and giving him a lifelong addiction to the candy and additional inspiration of his famous book. Thus, when he began his literary career after the war, one of the first stories he wrote, employing typical colored dialect, revolved around a sleazy and dangerous brown-skinned Jamaican gambler who owned a Cadillac. Magical, marvelous, and imaginative is how virtually everyone understood Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, a story about a poor child, Charlie Bucket, who by chance receives a golden ticket to a glowing future. No one can deny the genius of the book or its author. What reviewers and readers around the world did not see, how slavery underpinned his writings and how white supremacy fortified it. The power of positive imagination and what white readers desire to see simply overwhelmed the obvious. The depiction of Oompa Loompa in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is so brazen that Dahl might have had a copy of Thomas Clarkson's 1829 depiction of slavery in the British West Indies by his side when he crafted the book. Charlie, the four other golden ticket holders, and their parents first spied the Oompa Loompas. They cried out, "Where did they come from? What are they? Aren't they fantastic? No higher than my knee. Their skin is almost black." Willy Wonka tamped down speculations that he made them of chocolate. "They are real people. They are real workers." He advised the group that these tiny black people had been imported direct from Africa. They belonged to a tribe of a tiny miniature pygmy known as the Oompa Loompas. I discovered them myself. I brought them over from Africa myself, the whole tribe of them. 3,000 in all. I found them in the very deepest and darkest parts of Africa, the African jungle, where no white man has ever been before. Wonka explained that the tribe had been starving, subsisting on green caterpillars, but longing for cocoa beans. Oh, how they craved them. He bargained with the tribe and promised that if they agreed to live, I'm quoting unquote, live in my factory, they could have all the cocoa beans they wanted. "I'll even pay your wages in cocoa beans if you wish." So the black pygmies traded their freedom for permanent enslavement and all the cocoa beans they could eat. After the tribal leader agreed to stop eating green caterpillars and work for more beans, Wonka shipped them over here, every man, woman, and child in the Oompa Loompa tribe. It was easy. I smuggled them over in a large packing case with holes in them, and they eventually got here safely. As British had outlawed the slave trade in 1807, Wonka had smuggled them to England in packing cases in conditions that sounded almost as horrific as the Middle Passage. Conceived of slave experiences and treated the Oompa Loompas as their own. one of the lucky white children who gained admission to the factory. Verica saw the girl who got everything she wanted, wanted an Oompa Loompa. I want an Oompa Loompa right away. Okay, her exasperated father said. I'll see to it that you have one before the day is out. Willy Wonka embraced the role of master. If he clicked his fingers 3 times, a Oompa Loompa would appear and quiver at his loin. He bowed and smiled, showing beautiful white teeth. His skin was almost pure black, and the top of his fuzzy head came just above the height of Mr. Wonka's knee. He wore an unusual deerskin slug over his shoulder. A slave galley even made an appearance in the book, one powered by pygmies who rode on a river of chocolate. Just to further highlight the slave analogy, Dell deviously introduced whips. Whips, all shapes and sizes. And why whips? Well, for whipping cream, of course. Riveting the idea that these black pygmies were Wonka's property, to which he could do whatever he wanted. He subjected Oompa Loompas to hair-growing medical experiments and product testing that turned some into blueberries. This guy. 11 years after he had written Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Dell confessed to being mildly ashamed about his attitude toward those Africans that had worked with him in his Emperor adventure. He confessed seemed not right. He admitted that he had unconsciously fallen into an imperial frame of mind, something that could not be helped. You can't buck the tide, he remarked. It was the last days of the British Empire. Yet, almost the exact same time, he became outraged when one found racial prejudice in the wonderful fantasy tale that he had crafted and dedicated to his brain-damaged son. It didn't occur to me that my depiction of the Oompa Loompa was racist, he remarked when the new edition of the book emerged in 1973. But it did occur to the NAACP and others, which is why I revised the book. Dell hated criticism, especially when it pointed to the deepest flaws. His bewilderment of any care or regret, but from the fact that his racism had been exposed to public view, threatening his reputation and perhaps his profits. Dell learned nothing from his controversy. As you can see today, they just reinvented the movie again. When finishing another successful children's book, the BFG, his first